Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood at attention in the military courtyard, her heart pounding as General Harrison approached. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base, and dozens of soldiers watched from their positions. Sarah had been serving at Fort Campbell for 3 years, earning respect through her dedication and courage. She was known for her bright smile and willingness to help fellow soldiers, but today her face showed worry. The trouble started 2 weeks ago when Sarah discovered something that could change everything. During a routine inspection of the supply warehouse, she found documents hidden behind old equipment boxes. The papers showed that someone was stealing military supplies and selling them to outside buyers. The evidence was clear. Thousands of dollars worth of equipment had disappeared over the past 6 months. Sarah knew she had to report this discovery, but she also knew it would create problems. The person responsible for the warehouse was Sergeant Collins, who happened to be General Harrison's nephew. The general had always protected his family members, and everyone on the base knew it. Sarah spent sleepless nights thinking about what to do. Should she stay quiet to avoid trouble, or should she do the right thing and report the crime? Finally, Sarah made her decision. She gathered all the evidence and requested a meeting with General Harrison. When she walked into his office that morning, she felt nervous but determined. The general sat behind his large desk, his uniform perfect and his expression stern. Sarah saluted and began explaining what she had found. At first, General Harrison listened quietly, but as Sarah showed him the documents proving his nephew's involvement, his face grew red with anger. He stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. Sarah continued speaking, trying to stay calm and professional. She explained how the missing supplies could affect the safety of soldiers and how the theft was against everything the military stood for. General Harrison's anger exploded like a volcano. He began shouting at Sarah, calling her a troublemaker and accusing her of making up lies. His voice echoed through the office, and Sarah could see other soldiers looking through the windows. The general's words became more personal and cruel. He questioned her loyalty and suggested she was jealous of his nephew's position. Sarah tried to defend herself, showing him more evidence and explaining that she only wanted to protect the base. But General Harrison wouldn't listen. His anger seemed to grow stronger with each word Sarah spoke. Other officers in nearby rooms could hear the shouting, but nobody dared to interfere. Everyone knew the general's temper, and most people tried to stay away when he was angry. The situation became worse when Sarah mentioned that she had copies of all the documents for safety. General Harrison saw this as a threat to his family and his reputation. He accused her of planning to embarrass him and ruin his career. Sarah tried to explain that she only wanted justice, but the general's mind was already made up. Then something happened that nobody expected. In his rage, General Harrison reached across his desk and grabbed Sarah by her long brown hair. He pulled hard, causing her to stumble forward. Sarah cried out in pain and surprise, but the general didn't let go. For several seconds, he held her hair while shouting more accusations and threats. The office fell silent except for Sarah's quiet sobbing. General Harrison finally released her hair and ordered her to leave his office immediately. Sarah straightened her uniform, gathered the scattered documents, and walked toward the door. Her scalp hurt from where he had pulled her hair, and tears filled her eyes. But something else filled her heart, a determination that surprised even her. As Sarah left the office, she could feel the general's angry stare on her back. She walked through the hallways where other soldiers pretended not to notice her disheveled appearance. Some looked at her with sympathy, while others seemed afraid to make eye contact. Sarah realized that many people had probably suffered similar treatment from the general, but nobody had ever spoken up. That evening, Sarah sat in her small room in the barracks thinking about what had happened. Her head still hurt, and she could see red marks on her scalp where the general had grabbed her hair. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not just a hurt soldier, but someone who had a choice to make. She could accept what happened and stay quiet, or she could take action that might change everything. Sarah thought about her father, who had served in the military for 20 years. He always taught her that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing. She remembered her training and the oath she took when she joined the army. She had promised to protect and serve with honor, and that included protecting fellow soldiers from abuse and corruption. The documents were still hidden in her locker, along with photos she had taken of the evidence. Sarah knew that General Harrison expected her to give up and stay quiet. He probably thought that humiliating her would make her too scared to continue. But something inside Sarah had changed when he pulled her hair. Instead of fear, she felt a strength she didn't know she had. Late that night, Sarah made a decision that would surprise everyone on the base. She began writing a detailed report of everything that had happened, including the theft she discovered and the general's violent behavior. She knew this decision could end her military career or even put her in danger, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. As Sarah wrote her report, she thought about all the soldiers who depended on the supplies that were being stolen. She thought about young recruits who looked up to their leaders for guidance and protection. She realized that staying silent would make her part of the problem, and that was something she couldn't live with. The next morning would bring new challenges and difficult choices. Sarah didn't know what would happen when she took action, but she knew she couldn't let fear stop her from doing what was right. She folded her report carefully and placed it in her pocket, preparing for a day that would change everything at Fort Campbell. The next morning came too quickly for Sarah. She woke up before dawn, her mind still replaying yesterday's events. The red marks on her scalp had faded, but the memory of General Harrison's violent behavior remained clear. Sarah got dressed carefully, making sure her uniform was perfect. She wanted to look professional and confident, even though her hands were shaking as she buttoned her jacket. During breakfast in the mess hall, Sarah noticed how other soldiers looked at her. Word had spread quickly about what happened in the general's office. Some soldiers whispered when they thought she couldn't hear them. Others gave her supportive smiles but seemed afraid to talk to her directly. Sarah realized that everyone was waiting to see what she would do next. Corporal James Wilson, Sarah's closest friend on the base, sat down across from her with his breakfast tray. James had served with Sarah since they both arrived at Fort Campbell, and he knew her better than anyone. He could see the determination in her eyes, but he also saw the worry she was trying to hide. "Sarah," James said quietly, "everyone's talking about what happened yesterday. Are you okay?" His voice was full of concern, and Sarah appreciated having someone who cared about her well-being. She nodded but didn't speak right away. James continued, "Look, I know you're thinking about doing something, but Harrison has a lot of power here. Maybe you should just let this go and transfer to another base." Sarah looked at her friend with sad but determined eyes. "James, if I don't do something about this, who will? How many other soldiers has he hurt? How much more equipment will get stolen while good soldiers go without proper supplies?" Her voice was steady, but James could hear the emotion behind her words. James understood Sarah's point, but he was scared for her safety. "I get it, Sarah, I really do. But think about your career, your future. If you go against Harrison, he'll make sure you never get promoted. He might even find ways to get you kicked out of the army." James had seen what happened to other soldiers who challenged authority, and it usually didn't end well for them. After breakfast, Sarah made her way to the communications office. She had decided to contact the Inspector General's office, which handled complaints about military misconduct. This was a big step because once she filed an official complaint, there would be no going back. The Inspector General would investigate, and General Harrison would know exactly who reported him. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez worked in the communications office. She was an older soldier with 15 years of experience, and she had a reputation for being fair and trustworthy. When Sarah entered the office, Sergeant Rodriguez could see the serious expression on her face. "How can I help you, Lieutenant Martinez?" Rodriguez asked, gesturing for Sarah to sit down. Sarah took a deep breath and explained that she needed to file a formal complaint with the Inspector General. Rodriguez listened carefully, her expression growing more serious as Sarah spoke. "Lieutenant, filing an IG complaint is a serious matter," Rodriguez said gently. "Once you submit it, the investigation process will begin and everything will become official. Are you sure you want to proceed?" Rodriguez wasn't trying to discourage Sarah, but she wanted to make sure the young officer understood the consequences. Sarah pulled out her carefully written report and placed it on the desk. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I've thought about this all night. What happened to me was wrong, but the theft of military supplies affects everyone on this base. Soldiers' lives could be at risk if they don't have the equipment they need." Her voice was clear and confident. Rodriguez read through Sarah's report, her eyebrows raising as she saw the detailed evidence of the supply theft and the description of General Harrison's violent behavior. She had worked with many soldiers over the years, and she could tell that Sarah was telling the truth. The evidence was thorough and well documented. "This is very detailed work, Lieutenant," Rodriguez said with respect in her voice. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this. I'll help you submit this through the proper channels. Rodriguez began preparing the official forms and explaining the process to Sarah. While they worked on the paperwork, other soldiers came and went from the communications office. Some glanced curiously at Sarah, wondering what she was doing there. Sarah tried to stay focused on the task, but she couldn't help feeling nervous about what would happen once the complaint was submitted. After an hour of paperwork and procedures, the complaint was ready to be sent. Rodriguez looked at Sarah with a mixture of admiration and concern. Lieutenant, I want you to know that what you're doing takes real courage. Not many soldiers would be willing to stand up to a general, especially after what you experienced yesterday. Sarah felt a moment of doubt as her finger hovered over the submit button on the computer. She thought about James's warnings and the possible consequences for her career. She thought about her family and how they would react if she got in trouble. But then she remembered the faces of the young soldiers she worked with every day, and she thought about her duty to protect them. Here goes nothing, Sarah said quietly, and she pressed the button. The complaint was officially submitted to the Inspector General's office. Within hours, investigators would begin reviewing her allegations, and the wheels of military justice would start turning. As Sarah left the communications office, she felt a strange combination of relief and fear. She had done what she believed was right, but she knew the hardest part was still ahead. General Harrison would soon learn about the complaint, and his reaction would probably be even worse than yesterday's outburst. The rest of the day passed slowly for Sarah. She tried to focus on her regular duties, but her mind kept wandering to what might happen next. During lunch, she noticed that Sergeant Collins, the general's nephew, was absent from his usual table. She wondered if he already knew about the investigation or if General Harrison had warned him. That afternoon, Sarah received a message to report to Colonel Thompson's office. Colonel Thompson was General Harrison's second-in-command, and Sarah wasn't sure if this was related to her complaint or just routine business. As she walked to the colonel's office, she prepared herself for another difficult conversation. Colonel Thompson was known for being more reasonable than General Harrison, but he was also loyal to his commanding officer. When Sarah entered his office, she could see concern on his face. He gestured for her to sit down and close the door behind her. Lieutenant Martinez, Colonel Thompson began carefully, I understand there was an incident yesterday involving you and General Harrison. I want you to know that I'm here if you need to talk about anything. His tone was professional but kind, and Sarah sensed that he genuinely cared about her well-being. Sarah wasn't sure how much Colonel Thompson knew about her complaint, so she chose her words carefully. Thank you, sir. I'm handling the situation through proper channels. She maintained eye contact and kept her voice steady. Colonel Thompson nodded slowly. I respect that, Lieutenant. Just remember that there are people here who want to see you succeed. Don't let one bad experience define your entire military career. Sarah could tell he was trying to help her without directly contradicting his commanding officer. As Sarah left Colonel Thompson's office, she felt slightly better knowing that not everyone in leadership was against her, but she also realized that the next few days would test her resolve in ways she had never imagined. The investigation was just beginning, and General Harrison's response was still to come. 2 days after Sarah submitted her complaint, a black sedan arrived at Fort Campbell's main gate. Inside were 2 investigators from the Inspector General's office, Major Patricia Hayes and Captain David Chen. They had driven from headquarters after receiving Sarah's detailed report, and they came prepared to conduct a thorough investigation. Major Hayes was a veteran investigator with 12 years of experience handling military misconduct cases. She had seen everything from financial fraud to abuse of power, and she knew how to get to the truth even when people tried to hide it. Captain Chen was newer to investigations, but he was known for his attention to detail and his ability to analyze complex evidence. The investigators' arrival didn't go unnoticed. Within an hour, word had spread throughout the base that the Inspector General's office was conducting an investigation. Soldiers whispered about what this might mean, and many wondered if it was connected to the incident between Lieutenant Martinez and General Harrison. General Harrison learned about the investigators' presence from his aide, Lieutenant Morrison. Harrison's face turned red with anger when he realized that Sarah had actually followed through with her threat to report him. He had expected her to stay quiet after he had intimidated her, but clearly he had underestimated her determination. "Sir," Lieutenant Morrison said nervously, "the investigators are requesting access to supply records and personnel files. They also want to interview several soldiers, including Lieutenant Martinez and Sergeant Collins." Morrison could see the fury building in the general's eyes, and he took a step backward. General Harrison stood up abruptly, his chair slamming against the wall behind his desk. "That ungrateful little troublemaker thinks she can destroy my career and my family? She has no idea who she's dealing with." His voice was loud enough that people in the outer office could hear him clearly. Meanwhile, Sarah was in her office when she received a message to meet with the investigators. Her heart raced as she walked to the conference room where Major Hayes and Captain Chen were waiting. She had never been part of an official investigation before, and she wasn't sure what to expect. Major Hayes greeted Sarah with a professional but warm demeanor. "Lieutenant Martinez, thank you for coming. I'm Major Hayes and this is Captain Chen. We're here to investigate the allegations in your complaint. We want you to know that you're protected from retaliation while this investigation is ongoing." Sarah felt some relief hearing about protection from retaliation, but she also knew that General Harrison would find ways to make her life difficult, regardless of official policies. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm ready to answer any questions you have." Captain Chen opened a thick folder containing copies of all the evidence Sarah had provided. "Lieutenant, let's start with the supply theft you discovered. Can you walk us through exactly how you found the evidence and what it shows?" His voice was calm and encouraging. For the next 2 hours, Sarah explained everything in detail. She showed the investigators where she found the hidden documents, explained the patterns of missing supplies, and described how the evidence pointed to Sergeant Collins. The investigators took careful notes and asked detailed questions about dates, times, and procedures. Major Hayes was impressed by the thoroughness of Sarah's documentation. "Lieutenant, this is excellent investigative work. You've clearly put a lot of effort into gathering this evidence. Now let's talk about what happened when you reported this to General Harrison." Sarah's voice became quieter as she described the meeting in General Harrison's office. She explained how the general became increasingly angry, and how he eventually grabbed her hair. Captain Chen could see that this part was still painful for Sarah to discuss. "Lieutenant, I know this is difficult to talk about," Captain Chen said gently, "but it's important that we understand exactly what happened. Did anyone else witness the general's behavior?" Sarah shook her head. "No, sir. We were alone in his office, but I think other people heard the shouting. His voice was very loud, and the walls aren't very thick." She paused, then added, "I took photos of the marks on my scalp afterward, in case they were needed as evidence." Major Hayes leaned forward with interest. "You took photos? That shows excellent judgment, Lieutenant. Those photos could be important evidence. Do you still have them?" Sarah nodded and showed the investigators the photos on her phone. The images clearly showed red marks and scratches where General Harrison had grabbed her hair. Major Hayes and Captain Chen exchanged glances, recognizing that this was strong evidence of physical assault. After the interview with Sarah, the investigators began talking to other soldiers on the base. They spoke with Corporal Wilson, who confirmed that Sarah had seemed upset after her meeting with the general. They interviewed soldiers who worked in the supply warehouse, and several confirmed that equipment had been missing. The investigators also requested to speak with Sergeant Collins, but they learned that he had suddenly taken emergency leave and left the base the day after Sarah filed her complaint. This suspicious timing raised red flags for Major Hayes and Captain Chen. "It's interesting that Sergeant Collins disappeared right after the complaint was filed," Major Hayes said to her partner as they reviewed their notes. "That suggests he might have been warned about the investigation." Captain Chen nodded in agreement. "And if General Harrison warned his nephew, that could be considered obstruction of justice. We'll need to document this timeline carefully." The investigators spent the rest of the day examining supply records and interviewing warehouse personnel. They found clear evidence that large quantities of equipment had gone missing during times when Sergeant Collins was responsible for the warehouse. The pattern was too obvious to be coincidental. That evening, the investigators met with Colonel Thompson to discuss their findings. Thompson was professional and cooperative, but they could see that he was uncomfortable with the situation. He had worked with General Harrison for several years and found it hard to believe the allegations. "Colonel," Major Hayes said carefully, "we need to interview General Harrison tomorrow." Can you arrange for him to meet with us at 0900 hours? She wanted to give the general a chance to tell his side of the story, even though the evidence was already quite strong. Colonel Thompson agreed to arrange the meeting, but he looked worried. Major Hayes, I hope you understand that General Harrison has served with distinction for 25 years. This investigation is very difficult for everyone involved. Major Hayes understood the colonel's position, but she also knew that rank and service record didn't excuse criminal behavior. Colonel, we appreciate General Harrison's service, but we have to investigate all allegations thoroughly. That's our job. After the investigators left, Colonel Thompson went to General Harrison's office to inform him about the scheduled interview. The general's reaction was explosive. He threw papers across his desk and began ranting about conspiracy theories and personal vendettas. They're trying to destroy me because I maintain discipline on this base, General Harrison shouted. That Martinez girl is just a troublemaker who couldn't handle being corrected. His anger was so intense that Colonel Thompson worried about his mental state. Meanwhile, word of the investigation had spread throughout the base. Some soldiers supported Sarah for having the courage to speak up, while others worried that the investigation would harm the base's reputation. Sarah found herself at the center of attention, which made her uncomfortable. That night, Sarah received several anonymous notes under her door. Some were supportive, thanking her for standing up for what was right, but others were threatening, warning her to drop the investigation or face consequences. Sarah saved all the notes as potential evidence, but they made her realize how dangerous her situation had become. Corporal Wilson knocked on Sarah's door around 10 o'clock that evening. Sarah, are you okay? I heard some people talking about trying to make you withdraw your complaint. His voice was full of concern for his friend's safety. Sarah appreciated James's loyalty, but she also worried about him getting involved. I'm okay, James. I knew this wouldn't be easy when I decided to come forward. But I can't back down now, not when we're so close to getting justice. As Sarah prepared for bed, she thought about everything that had happened in just a few days. The investigation was moving quickly, and tomorrow General Harrison would have to answer questions about his behavior. Sarah knew that the next day would be crucial in determining whether justice would be served or whether the general's power would protect him from consequences. The base felt tense that night, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah lay awake thinking about her father's words about doing the right thing, and she felt proud that she had found the courage to stand up for herself and her fellow soldiers. The morning of General Harrison's interview arrived with unusual tension throughout Fort Campbell. Soldiers went about their duties quietly, sensing that something important was about to happen. Major Hayes and Captain Chen had prepared extensively for this crucial interview, knowing that confronting a general required careful handling and solid evidence. General Harrison arrived at the conference room exactly at 0900 hours, accompanied by a military lawyer he had requested. The general's face showed controlled anger and his jaw was clenched tight. He wore his dress uniform with all his medals and ribbons, clearly trying to intimidate the investigators with his rank and accomplishments. General Harrison, Major Hayes began formally. Thank you for meeting with us. As you know, we're investigating allegations of misconduct that have been brought to our attention. You have the right to have legal counsel present, which I see you've exercised. The general's lawyer, Captain Rebecca Foster, was an experienced military attorney who specialized in defending high-ranking officers. She had reviewed the allegations and knew her client was in serious trouble, but she was prepared to defend him aggressively. My client is here voluntarily to cooperate with this investigation, Captain Foster said. However, we want to make it clear that General Harrison categorically denies any wrongdoing and believes these allegations are part of a vendetta against him. Captain, Chen opened his folder and pulled out the evidence Sarah had provided. General, let's start with the supply theft allegations. Were you aware that significant amounts of equipment have been missing from the warehouse under Sergeant Collins' supervision? General Harrison's face reddened slightly, but he maintained his composure. Captain, military supply chains are complex operations. Equipment gets transferred, requisitioned, and redistributed constantly. Without seeing specific documentation, I can't comment on vague allegations of missing supplies. Major Hayes placed photocopies of the evidence in front of the general. These are copies of documents found hidden in the warehouse, showing systematic theft of equipment over a 6-month period. The evidence clearly indicates that Sergeant Collins was involved. What action did you take when Lieutenant Martinez brought this to your attention? The general studied the documents for several minutes, his lawyer looking over his shoulder. Captain Foster whispered something in his ear, and he nodded slightly. I don't recall Lieutenant Martinez presenting this information in a coherent or professional manner. She came to my office making wild accusations without proper evidence. Captain Chen leaned forward. General, Lieutenant Martinez provided detailed documentation and clear evidence. Are you saying you didn't review this evidence when she presented it to you? Lieutenant Martinez was emotional and disorganized during our meeting, General Harrison replied coldly. She made accusations against my nephew without proper procedures. I told her to follow chain of command and proper protocols if she had concerns. Major Hayes knew this wasn't true based on Sarah's detailed account and the quality of evidence she had provided. General, let's discuss what happened during that meeting. Can you describe your interaction with Lieutenant Martinez? General Harrison's composure began to crack slightly. Lieutenant Martinez was insubordinate and disrespectful. She refused to listen to reason and became confrontational when I tried to explain proper procedures to her. His voice was getting louder, and his lawyer placed a warning hand on his arm. General, Captain Chen said calmly, we have evidence that during this meeting you physically assaulted Lieutenant Martinez by grabbing her hair. How do you respond to this allegation? The room fell silent for several seconds. General Harrison's face went from red to pale, and then back to red again. Captain Foster quickly spoke up before her client could respond. That allegation is completely false and slanderous. General Harrison has never physically assaulted anyone under his command. But General Harrison's anger was building beyond his lawyer's control. That little troublemaker is lying. She's trying to destroy my career because I wouldn't let her ruin my nephew's reputation with her false accusations. His voice echoed through the conference room. Major Hayes pulled out her phone and showed the photos Sarah had taken of her scalp injuries. General, these photos were taken by Lieutenant Martinez immediately after your meeting. They show clear evidence of trauma consistent with hair being pulled forcefully. How do you explain these injuries? General Harrison looked at the photos, and for a moment his confident facade cracked completely. He remembered grabbing Sarah's hair in his anger, but he had convinced himself it wasn't serious enough to matter. Seeing the photographic evidence made him realize how much trouble he was in. I may have guided her toward the door, General Harrison said weakly. Sometimes physical direction is necessary to maintain discipline and order. His lawyer closed her eyes in frustration. Knowing her client had just admitted to assault, Captain Chen couldn't believe what he was hearing. General, you're saying that grabbing a subordinate's hair and pulling it hard enough to leave marks is appropriate physical direction? The general's anger exploded again, just as it had in his office with Sarah. You don't understand the pressures of command. Sometimes soldiers need to be reminded of their place. Martinez was out of line and I corrected her behavior. Captain Foster tried desperately to control the situation. General, I strongly advise you to stop talking and let me handle this interview. But Harrison was beyond listening to advice. She came into my office making accusations against my family. The general continued shouting. She threatened to embarrass me and ruin my nephew's career. What was I supposed to do, just sit there and let her destroy everything I've worked for? Major Hayes and Captain Chen exchanged glances. General Harrison was essentially confessing to assault and admitting that he was more concerned about protecting his nephew than addressing the theft of military supplies. This was exactly the kind of abuse of power that their investigation was designed to uncover. General, Major Hayes said firmly, you're admitting that you physically assaulted Lieutenant Martinez because she reported criminal activity involving your nephew. Is that correct? Captain Foster stood up quickly. This interview is over. My client will not be making any further statements. She tried to guide General Harrison toward the door, but he pushed her hand away. I'm not finished, Harrison yelled. You people don't understand how things work in the real military. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions and take strong action. Martinez needed to learn respect for authority. The general's outburst continued for several more minutes, during which he essentially admitted to every allegation in Sarah's complaint. He confirmed that he had grabbed her hair, that he had refused to investigate the supply theft because it involved his nephew, and that he believed physical intimidation was an appropriate leadership tool. When General Harrison finally left the conference room, still ranting about conspiracy theories and disrespectful subordinates, Major Hayes and Captain Chen sat in stunned silence. They had investigated many cases over the years, but they had never seen a subject confess so completely to serious misconduct. "Did that really just happen?" Captain Chen asked in amazement. He basically admitted to everything Martinez accused him of and then some. Major Hayes was already taking notes. "I've never seen anything like it. Usually, high-ranking officers either deny everything or lawyer up completely. Harrison just gave us enough evidence to end his career and probably send him to prison." The investigators spent the rest of the day documenting General Harrison's statements and reviewing the evidence one more time. They also learned that Sergeant Collins had not actually taken emergency leave, but had been secretly transferred to another base by his uncle before the investigation began. This added obstruction of justice to the list of charges. Meanwhile, word of the general's explosive interview spread quickly through the base. Soldiers who had heard him shouting from the conference room shared details with others, and soon everyone knew that the investigation was not going well for their commanding officer. Sarah learned about the interview from Corporal Wilson, who had been near the conference room when General Harrison's shouting began. "Sarah, you should have heard him," James said with amazement. "He basically admitted to everything you accused him of, and he was screaming about it like a crazy person." That evening, Colonel Thompson called an emergency meeting with all senior officers. The colonel's face showed the strain of the past few days, and everyone could see that he was deeply troubled by the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Thompson began heavily, "I'm sure you're all aware of the ongoing investigation. I want to make it clear that this base will continue to operate professionally regardless of what happens with General Harrison. We have a duty to our soldiers and to the mission." The senior officers nodded in agreement, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Their commanding officer had just destroyed his own career in spectacular fashion, and Lieutenant Martinez had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The day after General Harrison's disastrous interview, Fort Campbell felt like a completely different place. Soldiers walked with their heads held higher, and there was a sense of energy and hope that hadn't been there for months. Word of the general's confession had spread throughout the base, and everyone was talking about how Lieutenant Martinez had stood up to corruption and abuse. Major Hayes and Captain Chen spent the morning finalizing their investigation report. They had gathered overwhelming evidence of misconduct, including the general's own admissions during the interview. The case was so clear-cut that they expected quick action from headquarters. "In 15 years of investigations, I've never seen such a complete confession," Major Hayes told her partner as they reviewed their findings. "Harrison didn't just admit to assault and covering up theft. He practically gave us a manual on how not to be a military leader." Captain Chen was organizing the evidence files. The supply theft alone would have been enough to end his career, but the assault on Lieutenant Martinez and the obstruction of justice make this a criminal matter. He's looking at court-martial and probably prison time. While the investigators prepared their report, Sarah was experiencing something she hadn't expected: support from fellow soldiers who had been afraid to speak up before. Throughout the morning, soldiers approached her quietly to share their own stories about General Harrison's abuse of power. Sergeant Maria Santos, who worked in the motor pool, told Sarah about a time when the general had humiliated her in front of her entire unit for asking questions about safety procedures. "I wanted to report it," Santos said, "but I was afraid he would ruin my career. Seeing what you did gave me hope that things can change." Private First Class Kevin Johnson shared how the general had threatened to have him transferred to a dangerous assignment when he complained about missing protective equipment. "That equipment probably got stolen and sold just like you discovered," Johnson said. "Thank you for having the courage to do what the rest of us couldn't." These conversations made Sarah realize that General Harrison's behavior had been a pattern, not an isolated incident. She felt sad thinking about how many soldiers had suffered in silence, but she also felt proud that her actions might prevent future abuse. Corporal Wilson found Sarah during lunch and sat down with news that surprised her. "Sarah, I just heard something interesting." Colonel Thompson called a meeting with all the department heads and he told them that changes are coming. He said the base needs to rebuild trust and that every leader needs to examine their own behavior. Sarah was glad to hear that Colonel Thompson was taking the situation seriously. She had worried that some leaders might try to protect General Harrison or blame her for causing problems. "That's good news, James. Maybe something positive can come from all this trouble." "There's more," James continued. "I heard that several soldiers are coming forward with their own complaints about the general. The investigators are going to reopen the case to look at additional allegations. This news was both encouraging and overwhelming for Sarah. She was glad that other victims were finding their voices, but she also realized that the investigation would continue longer than expected. She would remain in the spotlight, which made her uncomfortable. That afternoon, Sarah received a message to meet with Colonel Thompson. As she walked to his office, she wondered what he wanted to discuss. When she arrived, she found the colonel looking tired but determined. "Lieutenant Martinez," Colonel Thompson began, "I want to personally apologize for what you experienced under General Harrison's command. Your courage in reporting his misconduct has opened our eyes to serious problems that we should have addressed earlier." Sarah appreciated the colonel's words, but she remained cautious. "Thank you, sir. I just did what I thought was right." She wasn't sure if Colonel Thompson had known about the general's behavior before her complaint. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that several other soldiers have come forward with similar complaints about General Harrison. Your actions have given them the courage to speak up about abuse they suffered." Colonel Thompson's voice was sincere, and Sarah could see that he was genuinely troubled by what he had learned. The colonel continued, "I've been reviewing personnel files and incident reports from the past 2 years. There's a pattern of complaints that were either ignored or buried. I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't see what was happening right under my nose." Sarah felt some sympathy for Colonel Thompson. She could see that he was struggling with the knowledge that he had failed to protect his soldiers. "Sir, General Harrison was very good at hiding his behavior from senior officers. He saved his worst actions for when he was alone with subordinates. That may be true, Lieutenant, but as second in command, I should have been more aware. I should have created an environment where soldiers felt safe reporting misconduct." Thompson stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the base where soldiers were going about their daily duties. "Sir, what's important now is that we fix the problems and make sure this doesn't happen again," Sarah said diplomatically. She didn't want to make Colonel Thompson feel worse, but she also wanted to ensure that real changes would be made. Thompson turned back to Sarah with a determined expression. "You're absolutely right, Lieutenant. That's why I'm implementing several immediate changes. First, we're establishing an anonymous reporting system for misconduct complaints. Second, all leaders will receive mandatory training on proper conduct and respect for subordinates." Sarah was encouraged by these changes, but she had learned to be cautious about promises from leadership. "Those sound like positive steps, sir. Will there be regular reviews to make sure the new policies are working?" "Absolutely," Thompson replied. "We're also bringing in outside consultants to review our leadership culture and recommend additional improvements. I want to make Fort Campbell a model for how a military base should be run." Later that day, Sarah encountered an unexpected situation that tested her newfound confidence. As she was leaving the commissary, she found herself face to face with Captain Morrison, General Harrison's former aide. Morrison had always been loyal to the general, and Sarah wasn't sure how he would react to her. "Lieutenant Martinez," Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. "I heard about what happened with the general." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I want you to know that I saw things over the past year that troubled me, but I didn't have the courage to speak up like you did." Sarah was surprised by Morrison's admission. She had always seen him as one of General Harrison's enablers. "Captain, it's never too late to do the right thing. If you have information that could help other victims, the investigators are still taking statements." Morrison nodded slowly. "I've already contacted Major Hayes. There are things I witnessed that support what other soldiers are saying about the general's behavior. I should have reported them when they happened, but I was afraid for my career." This conversation made Sarah realize how fear had silenced many good people on the base. General Harrison had created a culture where speaking up seemed impossible, and breaking that culture would take time and effort from everyone. That evening, Sarah received a phone call from her parents. Word of the investigation had reached them through military channels, and they were worried about their daughter's safety and career prospects. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" her mother asked with concern in her voice. "We heard that you're involved in some kind of investigation involving a general. Are you in trouble?" Sarah explained the situation to her parents, trying to reassure them while being honest about the challenges she faced. "Mom, I'm not in trouble. I reported misconduct and the investigation proved that I was right. But it's been a difficult experience." Her father, a retired military officer, understood the situation better than her mother. "Sarah, I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. That takes real courage, especially when you're challenging someone with so much power. How are the other soldiers treating you? It's mixed, Dad, Sarah replied honestly. Some people support me and are grateful that I spoke up. Others think I caused unnecessary trouble. But more soldiers are coming forward with their own stories, so I think people are starting to understand that this was bigger than just what happened to me. Her father's voice was firm and supportive. Sarah, remember that doing the right thing isn't always popular, but it's always worth it. You've probably saved other soldiers from abuse, and you've shown everyone on that base what real courage looks like. After the phone call, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 week. She had gone from being a quiet, hard-working lieutenant to being the center of a major investigation that would reshape her entire base. The experience had been traumatic and stressful, but it had also shown her inner strength she didn't know she possessed. As news of the investigation spread beyond Fort Campbell, Sarah began receiving messages from soldiers at other bases who had faced similar situations. Some shared their own stories of abuse and cover-ups, while others thanked her for giving them hope that change was possible in the military. One message particularly touched Sarah's heart. It came from a young female soldier at a base in Texas who wrote, "Lieutenant Martinez, your courage has inspired me to report harassment I've been experiencing from my sergeant. I was afraid to speak up, but seeing what you accomplished gives me hope that justice is possible. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to suffer in silence." Reading these messages made Sarah realize that her actions had consequences far beyond Fort Campbell. She had become a symbol of hope for soldiers everywhere who faced abuse and corruption, but felt powerless to fight back. The next morning brought news that would change everything once again. Major Hayes informed Sarah that the Inspector General's office had completed their preliminary report and was recommending immediate court-martial proceedings against General Harrison. Additionally, Sergeant Collins had been arrested at his new base and would face charges for theft and conspiracy. "Lieutenant Martinez," Major Hayes said with satisfaction, "your courage and thorough documentation have led to one of the most successful misconduct investigations in recent military history. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The investigation phase was ending, but she knew that the court-martial proceedings would bring new challenges and continued scrutiny. She had started this journey simply wanting to report theft and seek justice, but it had become something much larger than she ever imagined. 3 weeks after the investigation began, Fort Campbell buzzed with activity as preparations for General Harrison's court-martial got underway. Military lawyers, journalists, and officials from various commands arrived at the base, turning what had started as a simple misconduct complaint into one of the most significant military justice cases of the year. Sarah found herself at the center of media attention she never wanted. Reporters tried to interview her about her experiences, but military protocols prevented her from speaking publicly while the case was pending. She felt overwhelmed by the attention and sometimes wondered if she had made the right decision to come forward. Major Hayes met with Sarah to prepare her for testifying at the court-martial. "Lieutenant, I know this has been difficult for you, but your testimony will be crucial. General Harrison's defense team will try to discredit you, so we need to make sure you're ready for their questions." Sarah nodded, though the thought of facing cross-examination made her nervous. "Ma'am, I just want to tell the truth about what happened. I'm not trying to hurt anyone unnecessarily, but soldiers deserve to serve under leaders who respect them." "That's exactly the right attitude," Major Hayes replied. "Remember, you have evidence on your side. The photos, the documents, and the general's own admissions during our interview all support your account. Just stick to the facts and answer honestly." Captain Chen joined the preparation session with additional news. "Lieutenant, I thought you should know that 12 other soldiers have now come forward with complaints about General Harrison's behavior. Your courage in reporting him has given them the strength to speak up about their own experiences." This news both encouraged and saddened Sarah. She was glad that other victims were finally getting justice, but she was heartbroken to learn how many people had suffered under General Harrison's command. "I wish they had felt safe to report him earlier. Maybe we could have prevented some of the abuse." "Don't blame yourself, Lieutenant," Captain Chen said firmly. "You're not responsible for the general's actions or for other people's fear of reporting him. What matters is that you found the courage to act when it counted." The court-martial proceedings began on a Monday morning in the base's main courtroom. General Harrison sat at the defense table with his military lawyers. looking older and more haggard than he had just a few weeks earlier. His uniform was perfect, but the confident arrogance he once displayed had been replaced by barely contained anxiety. Sarah testified on the second day of the trial. As she walked to the witness stand, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her. General Harrison stared at her with a mixture of anger and desperation, but Sarah kept her focus on the prosecuting attorney who would be questioning her. "Lieutenant Martinez," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your discovery of missing supplies in the warehouse." Sarah spoke clearly and calmly, describing how she found the hidden documents and what they revealed about the systematic theft. When she described her meeting with General Harrison and the physical assault that followed, Sarah's voice remained steady despite the emotional difficulty of reliving those moments. She explained how the general grabbed her hair and the pain and shock she felt when it happened. "Lieutenant, did you take any action to document the injuries from this assault?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes, sir. I took photographs of the marks on my scalp immediately after leaving the general's office. I also wrote a detailed account of everything that happened while the events were fresh in my memory." Sarah's thorough documentation was proving crucial to the prosecution's case. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive but ultimately unsuccessful. He tried to suggest that Sarah had fabricated the evidence to get revenge on the general, but her documentation was too detailed and consistent to be fake. He attempted to portray her as an ambitious officer, trying to advance her career by destroying a superior. But other witnesses testified to her integrity and genuine concern for fellow soldiers. "Lieutenant Martinez," the defense attorney said during his questioning, "isn't it true that you were angry about being corrected by General Harrison and decided to get revenge by making false accusations?" Sarah looked directly at the attorney and replied firmly, "Sir, I reported criminal activity and assault because it was the right thing to do, not because I was angry. The evidence speaks for itself." When Sergeant Collins testified after being granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, his testimony devastated General Harrison's defense. Collins admitted to stealing supplies and selling them to civilian buyers, but he also revealed that his uncle had known about the theft for months and had helped cover it up. "General Harrison told me that family comes first," Collins testified. "He said that as long as I was careful and didn't take too much at once, nobody would notice. When Lieutenant Martinez found the evidence, he promised me he would handle it and make the problem go away." The most damaging testimony came from other soldiers who described a pattern of abuse and intimidation by General Harrison. Sergeant Santos told the court about being humiliated in front of her unit. Captain Morrison testified about witnessing the general threaten soldiers who questioned his decisions. The picture that emerged was of a leader who ruled through fear and used his position to protect his family while endangering his soldiers. On the final day of testimony, the court heard recordings of General Harrison's explosive interview with the investigators. His own words, played back in the courtroom, provided the most compelling evidence of his guilt. The jury could hear his admissions of assault, his callous disregard for the stolen supplies, and his belief that physical intimidation was acceptable leadership. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with their verdict. General Harrison was found guilty on all charges: assault, conspiracy to commit theft, obstruction of justice, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, and Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness as she watched a once powerful man face the consequences of his actions. During the sentencing phase, Sarah was allowed to make a victim impact statement. She stood before the court and spoke not just about her own experience, but about the importance of maintaining integrity and trust in military leadership. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "what happened to me was painful and frightening, but what bothers me most is knowing that other soldiers suffered in silence because they were afraid to speak up. Military leaders hold the lives and welfare of their soldiers in their hands. When that trust is broken, it endangers everyone," she continued. "I hope that my experience encourages other soldiers to report misconduct when they see it. And I hope it reminds leaders that their actions have consequences not just for themselves, but for everyone they command." General Harrison was sentenced to 5 years in military prison, reduction in rank to private, and dismissal from the Army. He would also have to pay restitution for the stolen supplies and face additional civilian charges related to the theft scheme. After the sentencing, Colonel Thompson, who had been appointed as the base's new commanding officer, held a formation for all personnel. He spoke about the importance of the court-martial and the lessons everyone should learn from it. "The events of the past month have been difficult for all of us," Thompson said to the assembled soldiers, "but they have also shown us the importance of moral courage and speaking up for what's right." Lieutenant Martinez demonstrated the kind of courage and integrity that we should all strive to emulate. He continued, "We are implementing new policies and procedures to ensure that this kind of abuse never happens again at Fort Campbell. But policies are only as good as the people who follow them. Each of you has a responsibility to maintain the highest standards of conduct and to report misconduct when you see it." That evening, Sarah received a call from the Inspector General himself, congratulating her on her courage and informing her that she would receive a commendation for her actions. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said, "your willingness to stand up to corruption and abuse has made the entire military stronger. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but what meant more to her were the personal messages from fellow soldiers who thanked her for giving them hope and showing them that change was possible. She had started this journey simply trying to do the right thing, but it had become something much larger and more meaningful than she ever imagined. 6 months after General Harrison's court-martial, Fort Campbell had transformed into a completely different place. The atmosphere of fear and intimidation that had once dominated the base had been replaced by a culture of respect, transparency, and mutual support. Sarah walked through the same corridors where she had once felt isolated and threatened, now seeing smiles and hearing laughter from soldiers who felt safe and valued. Colonel Thompson had proven to be an exceptional leader during the transition period. He had kept his promises about implementing new policies and creating an environment where soldiers felt safe reporting problems. The anonymous reporting system had already prevented several potential misconduct situations, and the mandatory leadership training had changed how officers interacted with their subordinates. Sarah had been promoted to captain and was now serving as the base's deputy inspector, a newly created position designed to ensure ongoing oversight of leadership conduct. It was a role that suited her perfectly, combining her natural sense of justice with her experience in identifying and addressing misconduct. "Captain Martinez," Sergeant Santos called out, as Sarah passed the motor pool during her morning rounds. "I wanted you to know that the new protective equipment arrived yesterday. No more missing supplies and no more wondering if we'll have what we need to stay safe." Sarah smiled at the sergeant's obvious relief. "That's great news, Sergeant Santos. How are things going with your new supervisor?" After General Harrison's removal, several leadership changes had been made throughout the base to ensure fresh starts and new perspectives. "Major Collins has been wonderful," Santos replied. "She listens to our concerns and actually acts on them. It's amazing how much difference good leadership makes." Major Collins was no relation to the former Sergeant Collins, and her appointment had brought much-needed integrity to the supply chain operations. As Sarah continued her rounds, she reflected on how much her own life had changed. The shy, uncertain lieutenant who had discovered those hidden documents had been replaced by a confident officer who was respected throughout the base for her courage and integrity. The transformation hadn't been easy, and there had been many moments of doubt and fear, but Sarah now understood that standing up for what's right was worth any personal cost. Corporal Wilson, now Sergeant Wilson after his own well-deserved promotion, caught up with Sarah near the training facilities. "Sarah, I mean Captain Martinez," he said with a grin. "I still can't believe how much has changed around here. Do you remember when you were afraid to even mention the missing supplies?" Sarah laughed at her friend's observation. "James, I remember being terrified that my entire career would be ruined if I spoke up. It's funny how things turn out sometimes. The thing I thought would destroy my career actually made it stronger." "You've inspired a lot of people, you know," Wilson said seriously. "I've heard from soldiers at other bases who've started reporting problems because they heard about what you accomplished here. You've probably helped more people than you'll ever know." That afternoon, Sarah received a special visitor in her office. Major Hayes from the Inspector General's office had come to Fort Campbell to conduct a follow-up assessment of the changes that had been implemented. She was impressed by what she found. "Captain Martinez," Major Hayes said as they toured the base together, "I've investigated misconduct at dozens of installations over the years, but I've never seen such a complete cultural transformation. What you started here has become a model for how military organizations should handle these situations. Sarah felt proud of the progress, but she remained humble about her role. Ma'am, the real change came from everyone working together to build something better. I just happened to be the one who started the process. Don't underestimate your contribution, Major Hayes replied. It takes extraordinary courage to challenge a system that seems impossible to change. You proved that one person with integrity can make a difference for thousands of others. During her visit, Major Hayes also met with soldiers throughout the base to assess the new culture. She found that morale had improved dramatically. Retention rates were up, and soldiers consistently reported feeling valued and respected by their leaders. The anonymous reporting system had handled over 50 minor issues in 6 months, preventing them from becoming major problems. That evening, the base held its annual awards ceremony, and Sarah was selected to receive the Meritorious Service Medal for her role in exposing corruption and improving base operations. As she stood before her fellow soldiers to accept the award, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. When I first discovered evidence of theft in our supply warehouse, Sarah said during her acceptance speech, I never imagined it would lead to such significant changes for our entire base. I was just trying to do my job and protect the soldiers I serve with, she continued. The past year has taught me that moral courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're afraid. Every soldier in this room has the power to make a positive difference, whether it's reporting misconduct, helping a fellow soldier in need, or simply treating others with respect and dignity. The audience of soldiers listened intently as Sarah spoke about the importance of maintaining integrity and supporting each other. We are stronger when we stand together for what's right, she said. No one should ever feel that they have to suffer in silence or that their voice doesn't matter. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by several young soldiers who thanked her for showing them what leadership really meant. Private Johnson, a new recruit who had heard Sarah's story during orientation, spoke for many of them. Captain Martinez, Johnson said, knowing that someone like you is here makes me feel safer and more confident about my decision to serve. You've shown us that the military really can be an honorable profession, where good people are protected and bad behavior has consequences. Later that night, Sarah called her parents to share the news about her award and the positive changes at Fort Campbell. Her father, who had worried about her safety during the investigation, was now filled with pride about his daughter's accomplishments. Sarah, when you first told us about reporting that general, your mother and I were scared for you, her father admitted. We knew you were doing the right thing, but we also knew how dangerous it could be to challenge someone with so much power. Now we see that your courage has made the military better for everyone, her mother added. Honey, we've received letters from parents of other soldiers at your base, thanking us for raising a daughter who stood up for their children. That means more to us than any medal or promotion could. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she looked out her window at the base that had become her second home. The same buildings and facilities were there, but everything felt different now. Soldiers walked with confidence. Leaders treated their subordinates with respect, and there was a sense of pride and purpose that had been missing for so long. Sarah thought about General Harrison, now serving his prison sentence and facing the consequences of his choices. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only sadness that a man with so much potential had chosen the path of corruption and abuse. She hoped that his punishment would serve as a warning to other leaders about the importance of integrity and respect for subordinates. The next morning brought news that filled Sarah with hope for the future. The Inspector General's office had decided to implement the Fort Campbell model at military installations worldwide. The policies and procedures that had been developed in response to Sarah's complaint would now protect soldiers everywhere. Captain Martinez, Colonel Thompson said during their weekly meeting, I just received word from headquarters that our leadership development program is being adopted Army-wide. Your actions have influenced military policy at the highest levels. Sarah was amazed by how far the ripple effects of her decision had spread. What started as a simple desire to report theft and seek justice had become a movement that would protect countless soldiers for years to come. As she began another day of work in her role as deputy inspector, Sarah felt grateful for the journey that had brought her to this point. She had learned that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about acting despite fear when action was needed. She had discovered inner strength she never knew she possessed, and she had seen how one person's decision to do the right thing could inspire positive change in an entire organization. Most importantly, Sarah had proven that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible, and that standing up for what's right was always worth the risk. Fort Campbell was now a place where soldiers could serve with pride, knowing that their leaders would protect and respect them. And Sarah Martinez, the quiet lieutenant who had once been afraid to speak up, had become a symbol of hope and courage for military personnel everywhere.